Squirrels congicus. The Congo rope squirrel eats plants and insects. They spend most of their time in the forest canopy, but sometimes descend to the floor to find the freshest shoots. In the town of Bukongu, in the Central Democratic Republic of Congo, rope squirrels usually avoid people. But on the outskirts, farmers began clearing forest to plant crops. Rope squirrels started to descend into the fields and eat the young plants. In 2015, an encounter between a human and a squirrel would lead to a terrible tragedy. The little creatures are noisy and exciting. They chitter together and raise their tails when they spot a predator. Local boys, like Paul, like to chase them in the fields. One day, chasing squirrels in the early morning, he caught one and brought it home as a pet. The little rope squirrel entertained his whole family until it inexplicably died the next day. A week later, Paul fell ill with a fever. Then his skin began to blister. Other boys he played with also got sick. In cramped living conditions, the sickness spread to other members of his family. A later study by scientists found 2 out of 3 rope squirrels carry the Mpox virus around the town of Bukongu. The animals are mostly unaffected by the virus, but it can have a devastating impact when it jumps over into humans. Since the 1970s, Mpox has made the jump from animal to human a number of times. Often it is boys below the age of 15, living on the edge of disturbed forest, in poor homes, who catch Mpox from animals. Many of these boys have not been vaccinated against smallpox, a similar disease. Sadly, it is also often children who die from the virus. Through a scratch or bite or exchange of fluids, the Mpox virus enters the human body and immediately looks for a cell with a nucleus. The virus quietly takes over the cell and turns it into a factory, creating replicas of itself to spread across the body. From human to human, it spreads through airborne particles, contaminated materials, or sexual contact. 1,000 kilometers east of Bukongu in North Kivu province, Mpox began to spread rapidly amongst refugees from one of the world's most neglected conflicts. The chaos on DRC's eastern border has roots which go back to colonial times, when European powers moved ethnic groups to work on plantations and created arbitrary borders. Today, the conflict is funded by valuable minerals which power the world's smartphones. DRC is fighting the M23 rebel group, who are partly supported by the Rwandan government. In fact, Rwandan soldiers have been captured fighting for M23. Rwanda justifies its presence as protecting a particular ethnic group, but also benefits from the flow of minerals across the border. Meanwhile, the DRC funds rival militia groups. To complicate matters, Uganda and Burundi also have interests in the region. Unfortunately, the Kivu conflict does little to inconvenience the world, and so the DRC and Rwanda proxy war has created chaos for thousands of people. Refugee camps in North Kivu have poor sanitation and are a place where disease can spread quickly. Gangs of armed men move from town to town, making it easy to spread disease as well. Congo's war-torn province has become the incubation zone for the global Mpox outbreak. The only disadvantage to the virus has been the partial closure of the key border crossing in Goma. For a while, this stopped Mpox from spreading into Rwanda, but this state of affairs didn't last long. Some refugees in North Kivu have travelled south to Bukavu, a border town where the crossing has remained open. Small cross-border traders flourish in Bukavu, where Rwandan onions and tomatoes are in high demand. In July 2024, Sarah, a 33-year-old woman from Rwanda, crossed the border to Bukavu to meet some relatives and do business. She stayed in town a couple of days, and by the time she decided to return home, she was feeling sick. Guards at the border noticed she was unwell and called a doctor. The test for Mpox was positive. Because Mpox only shows symptoms after a week, other visitors to Bukavu returned to Rwanda without being identified. Some were later tested positive when they admitted themselves to hospital. The Rwandan government has been quick to track and isolate the virus, but in neighbouring Burundi, things look more doubtful. Egide Irambona, met for a drink with a friend in Bujumbura, Burundi's largest city. His friend had recently visited the DRC, and Egide noticed some strange blisters on his arm. A week later, Egide and his wife both tested positive for Mpox. Burundi is one of the poorest nations in the world, ranked 187 out of 93 countries on the Human Development Index. Cross-border trade is an important part of people's income, and Mpox has spread quickly in the country. In July, 170 new cases were detected. With a weak health service and little government infrastructure, Burundi may become the new incubator zone for Mpox. By mid-2024, cases were being reported in Europe and Asia. Mpox was declared a global public health emergency, but in 2022, there was a major outbreak in West Africa. Paul, the younger boy, got sick in Bukongu in 2015. The truth is, Mpox cases have been on the rise in Africa for years, and the recent outbreak is the result of prejudice and neglect. So, how did we get here? Humans got off on the wrong foot from the start. The virus was first discovered in 1958 in a group of laboratory monkeys in Denmark. Consequently, it was given the name Monkeypox, but although monkeys carry the virus in the wild, it's much more common in small rodents, like the rope squirrel. Because of this confusion and the racist connotations of the term, the virus has since been renamed Mpox. It wasn't until 1970 that the first human case of Mpox was identified in the DRC. At the time, it was noticed because of efforts to eradicate smallpox. This global vaccination effort led to the elimination of smallpox in 1980. Although Mpox is closely related to smallpox, it didn't receive similar attention. Many people viewed it as an exotic disease which only affected Africans. Since the 1990s, a whole generation of children have grown up in West and Central Africa without being vaccinated against smallpox. There's no need, right? Smallpox is eradicated, but Mpox isn't, and the same vaccine is effective against both. Only now that the cases have begun to grow outside Africa are vaccines going where they're needed. But the warning signs have been around for 20 years. In 2003, an outbreak in America was caused by African rodents imported as pets. The disease spread to prairie dogs who presented with a cough, fever, and rash. The outbreak was brought under control by smallpox vaccination. Like ice cream, Mpox comes in a variety of flavors, and America got lucky. The 2003 outbreak was caused by Clade 2, generally considered a less deadly form of the virus. Unfortunately, the current outbreak is a mutation of the more dangerous Clade 1. In 2023, researchers predicted the virus would mutate to become less deadly and less detectable, but much more contagious. As Mpox has spread across Africa in 2024, it has flourished at the continent's weakest points. Areas of conflict, poverty, and neglect have become Mpox incubators, allowing the virus to mutate and multiply. Like a river, Mpox always flows to the lowest point, into the gaps the world overlooks, but cannot afford to overlook anymore. For more videos like this, like and subscribe to the Africa Review.